Have you ever received a single text message that quietly ended a marriage before either person admitted it was over? I never imagined my 42nd birthday would become that kind of story, but looking back, everything changed the moment I stopped asking questions and started paying attention. The restaurant reservation was for 7 o'clock at our favorite place overlooking the river, the same place where Olivia and I had celebrated every birthday and anniversary since we got married. I arrived 15 minutes early because I still believed traditions mattered, even if life had become busier over the past year. A small chocolate cake waited on the table with my name written in white icing, and the hostess smiled as she asked if my wife was parking the car. I smiled back and said she would be here soon because I believed that myself. At 6:43 my phone vibrated. I am so sorry, Ethan. A client just scheduled an emergency meeting. I have to take it tonight. Rain check? Happy birthday. I love you. I read the message twice, then a third time, searching for something that sounded wrong. Nothing did. Every word was polite. Every sentence sounded caring. Yet something inside me stayed perfectly still instead of disappointed. A year earlier I would have begged her to come anyway. 6 months earlier I might have argued. That night I simply looked out the restaurant window as families laughed together, couples toasted with glasses of wine, and an elderly man held his wife's hand across the table like time had never touched them. I thanked the waitress, paid for the untouched dinner, asked her to box the cake, and walked into the warm Texas evening carrying a birthday dessert meant for two. My phone buzzed again. Olivia sent a smiling selfie from inside what looked like a luxury hotel lobby. Wish I was with you. This meeting should not take long. Most husbands would have focused on the smile. I noticed the reflection in the polished marble behind her. It showed an elevator bank and a digital directory listing room numbers for the upper floors. I had seen that lobby before. Not once. Not by accident. Enough times to recognize details most people ignored. I sat inside my truck without starting the engine, placed the cake on the passenger seat, and watched the city lights flicker against the windshield. My birthday no longer mattered. What mattered was whether I was finally ready to accept something I had quietly refused to believe for weeks. I unlocked my phone, opened our conversation, and stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers never shook. My breathing stayed steady. Anger would not help me. Accusations would only give lies room to grow. Sometimes the strongest move is letting the truth introduce itself. I typed one sentence, read it once, and pressed send. Say hi to the man in suite 1408. The message showed as delivered almost instantly. Then nothing. No typing bubble. No explanation. No cheerful reply with another excuse. 30 seconds passed. Then 1 minute. Then 3. Finally my phone rang. Olivia's name filled the screen. For the first time in our marriage, I looked at her call, let it ring until the silence answered for me, and realized my birthday had just given me the one gift I never expected, the truth. I did not answer the call. It rang until the screen went dark, then rang again almost immediately. 5 calls in less than 4 minutes. Olivia never called twice unless something had gone seriously wrong, and suddenly the woman who had been too busy for her husband's birthday could not stop reaching for her phone. I slipped it into my pocket, started the truck, and drove home without turning on the radio. The silence felt honest in a way music never could. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was glowing exactly as I had left it that morning. Everything looked normal, but normal had become the most convincing disguise in my marriage. I carried the boxed birthday cake inside, placed it in the refrigerator, loosened my tie, and finally sat alone in the living room. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a text. Ethan, please answer. I can explain. I looked at those 5 words for several seconds before locking the screen. The strange thing was that I no longer wanted an explanation. Explanations usually arrived after decisions had already been made. Truth arrived much earlier. Hidden inside routines people believed nobody noticed. 3 weeks earlier, that truth had begun with something so small that most husbands would have laughed it off. Olivia had started protecting her phone. Not dramatically. She did not hide it under pillows or rush into another room. She simply began placing it face down on every table. She started taking it with her when she walked 10 feet to the kitchen for a glass of water. If I asked who had called, she answered quickly but never naturally. It was always a client, always a deadline, always another project that somehow could not wait until morning. I wanted to believe her because trusting someone is much easier than questioning the person you promised to spend your life with. Then there were the schedule changes. Our Friday dinners quietly disappeared. Sunday breakfasts became business breakfasts. Evening walks around the neighborhood turned into conference calls. Every explanation sounded reasonable by itself, but reasonable things can create an unreasonable pattern when they happen often enough. One Saturday morning she mentioned a new client who preferred meeting at different hotels because he traveled constantly. She laughed as if it were just another strange business request. I laughed too, but something stayed with me after the conversation ended. A week later I attended a luncheon downtown hosted by one of my suppliers. The event happened to be inside the same hotel she had casually mentioned. During a break I wandered through the lobby to grab coffee, and I noticed the polished marble floor, the tall indoor palm trees, and the elegant brass directory beside the elevators. I remember glancing at the room listings without thinking they would ever matter. Yet the image remained in my mind like an old photograph. Days later Olivia sent me a selfie from what she claimed was another client meeting. Behind her shoulder I recognized the exact chandelier hanging above the hotel entrance. The same marble. The same artwork. The same elevator bank. She never realized that one ordinary business luncheon had quietly given me a perfect memory of that place. I still said nothing. I still kissed her goodbye every morning. I still asked about her day every evening. Some people mistake silence for weakness. In reality, silence gives the truth enough room to reveal itself without interruption, and by the time my birthday arrived, I had already begun putting together a puzzle that Olivia did not even know existed. Most people believe discovering the truth requires dramatic confrontations or expensive private investigators. I discovered that the truth usually hides inside ordinary moments that nobody thinks are important. After recognizing the hotel from Olivia's photograph, I made one promise to myself. I would not accuse her until every question had an answer. Doubt destroys relationships, but false accusations destroy something even deeper. If I was going to face whatever waited ahead, I wanted facts instead of fear. During the following week I changed nothing about my routine. I left for work at the usual time, called Olivia during lunch exactly as I always had, and asked whether she wanted Italian or barbecue for dinner on Friday. She smiled, thanked me for asking, and said another client meeting had already filled her evening. I answered with the same calm voice I had always used. After hanging up, I opened my calendar instead of my emotions. Every business meeting she mentioned had a date. Every late night had a time. Every unexpected cancellation left a small mark that slowly formed a pattern. The meetings almost always happened at the end of the workday. They usually lasted between 2 and 3 hours. Curiously, they almost never resulted in phone calls afterward, even though Olivia often claimed the clients were demanding. One afternoon I happened to drive past the hotel while returning from a supplier across town. I did not plan it. The route simply took me there. Cars entered the parking garage while valets greeted arriving guests. Everything looked ordinary until I noticed Olivia's silver sedan turning into the entrance. She had told me she was meeting a client at an office building nearly 10 miles away. I kept driving. I did not follow her. I did not pull into the garage. Instead, I circled the block once, parked at a coffee shop across the street, and waited with a cup that eventually grew cold in my hands. 90 minutes later her car remained exactly where I had first seen it. I finally drove home because I already knew enough to continue without chasing another answer that evening. Over the next several days I paid attention to details I had ignored before. Receipts left in shopping bags showed purchases near the hotel district. Parking charges appeared on our shared credit card statement, always from the same garage, always during hours she described as office meetings. Even the mileage on her car quietly supported the same story. None of those facts proved betrayal by themselves. Together they proved something else. Olivia was lying about where she spent her time. That realization hurt more than I expected because honesty had always been the foundation of our marriage. I remembered the woman who used to leave handwritten notes in my lunch bag, who laughed whenever we got lost on road trips, who insisted that trust was the one thing money could never replace. Somewhere along the way that woman had disappeared without either of us acknowledging it. I still hoped there might be an explanation I had not considered. Perhaps the client valued privacy. Perhaps she was helping someone through a personal crisis. I gave every possible excuse a chance to survive. Yet each new fact quietly closed another door. By the time my birthday approached, I had stopped wondering whether Olivia was hiding something. The only question left was whether she realized I had already begun seeing the pieces long before she noticed I was putting them together. Once I understood that Olivia had been lying about where she was spending her evenings, I stopped searching for dramatic answers and started paying attention to ordinary timing. People can prepare convincing stories, but very few can keep every small detail consistent for weeks. I knew I had only one advantage left. Olivia still believed I trusted every word she said. I was determined to keep it that way until the truth revealed itself completely. The following Monday she came home carrying takeout from my favorite barbecue restaurant. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and apologized for being so busy lately. She said things would slow down after her biggest clients signed a contract. I thanked her for dinner, asked how the meeting had gone, and listened carefully. She described a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. 2 nights earlier she had told me the same client preferred private hotel meetings because he traveled constantly. She did not realize she had quietly replaced one version of the story with another. I did not point it out. Instead, I asked what she wanted to do the following weekend. She relaxed immediately, convinced that I had accepted her explanation without question. That was the moment I realized something important. She had stopped worrying about telling the truth because she no longer expected me to notice the differences. Every evening became another opportunity to observe rather than react. I noticed how she checked the time before every supposed client meeting. I noticed how she changed outfits only on those evenings, choosing clothes that looked polished but not overly formal. I noticed that she always carried the same leather portfolio even though it came home looking exactly as it had when she left. Small details rarely lie. One Thursday afternoon I received an email from the hotel confirming a reservation for a business luncheon that my company had scheduled for the following month. Attached to the confirmation was a digital map of the property showing meeting rooms, restaurants, elevators, and guest floors. I studied it for only a few minutes before one detail caught my attention. Guest rooms on the 14th floor began with the numbers 1401. Suite 1408 appeared at the end of a quiet hallway separated from the standard rooms. I closed the file without fully understanding why that number stayed in my mind. 2 days later Olivia mentioned another evening meeting at the same hotel. She casually said she would probably be on one of the upper guest floors because all the conference rooms downstairs had been reserved. Her sentence lasted only a few seconds, but it connected perfectly with the floor plan I had seen. She had given me information without realizing it. From that moment forward I no longer wondered whether the hotel was involved. I only needed to know whether there was one final piece missing. The answer arrived sooner than I expected. On the morning of my birthday I left for work before Olivia woke up. Around noon I received a calendar reminder about our dinner reservation, followed almost immediately by a notification from our shared credit card account. A parking charge had already been authorized at the downtown hotel garage, even though Olivia had texted me less than an hour earlier saying she was still at her office preparing for a late afternoon meeting. I stared at the notification for several seconds before locking my phone. My heartbeat remained steady because surprise had already disappeared. The only thing left was certainty. By the time evening arrived and she canceled my birthday dinner for another emergency client meeting, I already knew exactly where she had gone, and I also knew the single sentence that would tell her our marriage had reached the point where excuses no longer mattered. After ignoring Olivia's calls that night, I expected another excuse, Another carefully arranged explanation that would sound convincing until the next contradiction appeared. Instead, my phone remained silent until a little after 10 o'clock. Then a single message arrived. I am coming home. Please wait for me. I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. The untouched birthday cake still sat inside the refrigerator, and somehow that small white box felt heavier than anything we had carried through our marriage. 20 minutes later I heard her car pull into the driveway. The front door opened slowly, and Olivia stepped inside looking nothing like the confident woman who had smiled in the hotel lobby photograph earlier that evening. Her eyes immediately searched the room until they found me sitting quietly at the dining table. Ethan, she whispered, please let me explain. I nodded toward the empty chair across from me. Then explain. She sat down without removing her coat. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally she took a deep breath and asked the question I had been expecting ever since I sent that message. How did you know about Suite 1408? I looked at her without raising my voice. You are asking the wrong question. She lowered her eyes. Then what is the right question? I answered. The right question is why you believed I would never notice. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly, but I had already learned that emotion alone did not change facts. She admitted that she had been meeting someone at the hotel for weeks. She insisted it had started as business conversations that slowly became personal. She said she kept telling herself she would end it before I ever found out. She claimed she never wanted to hurt me. I listened without interrupting because there was no longer any benefit in arguing over intentions. Choices mattered more than promises. When she finished speaking, I asked one question. Was tonight really about a client? She closed her eyes and quietly answered. No. The room fell completely silent. I realized that the hardest part of discovering the truth was not hearing the answer. The hardest part was realizing that the person sitting across from me had looked into my eyes every day for weeks while carrying a completely different version of our life. Olivia reached into her purse and placed her hotel key card on the table. I should have told you everything sooner. I stared at the small plastic card before sliding it back toward her. I do not need proof anymore. She looked confused. Then why did you mention that room number instead of confronting me weeks ago? I leaned back in my chair and answered honestly. Because I wanted to know whether the truth would come from you or from fear. She covered her face with both hands, understanding exactly what I meant. The room number itself had never been the trap. The trap was giving her one final opportunity to choose honesty on her own. Instead, the first thing she had done after receiving my message was call repeatedly. Not to confess, but to find out how much I knew. That answer revealed more than any investigation ever could. At that moment I understood something I had resisted accepting for far too long. Trust does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It fades one small decision at a time until one day two people are sitting at the same table living completely different realities, and no apology can return them to the place where the first lie began. Neither of us slept much that night. Olivia remained in the guest bedroom while I stayed in our room, staring at the ceiling until the first light of morning crept through the curtains. I expected to feel overwhelming anger, but what settled over me instead was clarity. Once the truth is spoken aloud, confusion loses its power. Around 7 o'clock I walked into the kitchen and found Olivia sitting quietly with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. She looked exhausted. The confidence that had carried her through weeks of carefully planned explanations had disappeared, replaced by someone who finally understood the weight of every decision she had made. She looked up as I entered. I know saying I am sorry is not enough, she said softly. You are right, I answered. It is not. She nodded without arguing. What happens now? It was a fair question, but it deserved an honest answer instead of an emotional one. Now we stop pretending everything can go back to yesterday. She lowered her eyes again. I never meant for any of this to happen. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Nobody plans for trust to disappear. It happens because people believe one more secret will not matter. Then another. Then another. Eventually the secrets become the relationship. She quietly wiped away a tear. I was afraid to tell you. No, I replied gently. You were afraid of losing the version of life that allowed you to keep both worlds at the same time. She did not deny it. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute, but for the first time in weeks it was an honest silence. There were no stories being invented inside it. No excuses waiting to be delivered. Finally, she reached into a folder she had brought downstairs and placed several printed pages on the table. They were emails between her and the man she had been meeting. I want you to know everything, she whispered. I looked at the papers but made no effort to read them. I do not need to know every conversation, I said. I already know the only fact that matters. You chose someone else instead of choosing honesty with me. She slowly gathered the pages back together. Is there anything I can do? I thought about that question much longer than she probably expected. There had been a time when I would have listed conditions, counseling appointments, promises, or timelines. That version of me no longer existed. You can tell the truth from this moment forward, I finally answered. Not because it will save our marriage, but because it might save the person you become after this. Tears rolled down her face again, but she accepted those words without interruption. Later that afternoon, I contacted an attorney and scheduled a consultation for the following week. I did not hide the appointment, and I did not announce it dramatically. I simply placed the confirmation on the kitchen counter where Olivia could see it. She picked up the paper, read it carefully, and closed her eyes for several seconds before placing it back exactly where she had found it. She did not beg me to cancel. She did not accuse me of giving up too easily. Instead, she quietly said, I understand. In that moment, I realized something that surprised me. The conversation was no longer about punishment. It was about accepting reality. Sometimes the strongest decision is not made in the middle of an argument. Sometimes it is made after the argument never happens because both people finally recognize that the truth has already answered every question that remains. The consultation lasted less than an hour, yet when I walked back into the parking lot it felt as though I had closed the chapter that had been ending long before either of us admitted it. My attorney explained the process in clear, practical terms, reminding me that important decisions should be made calmly instead of emotionally. I appreciated that advice because calm had become the only thing keeping me steady. When I arrived home, Olivia was sitting on the back porch watching the late afternoon sun settle behind the trees. She looked up when she heard the screen door open, but neither of us rushed to fill the silence. For weeks our conversations had been crowded with incomplete truths. Now there was almost nothing left to hide. I sat across from her with 2 glasses of iced tea, placing one on the table without saying a word. After a few moments she quietly asked, Did you meet with the attorney? I nodded. Yes. She took a slow breath before asking the next question. Are you certain this is what you want? I looked out across the yard where we had once planned birthday parties, weekend barbecues, and dreams that seemed permanent at the time. I am certain this is what I need, I answered. There is a difference. She lowered her head, absorbing the words instead of arguing against them. I keep wishing I could go back to that first lie and choose differently, she whispered. So do I replied. Not because it would erase what happened, but because it would have given us a chance to solve the problem before it became our entire marriage. She nodded slowly. I did not realize how many small choices were leading me here. Most people never do, I said. Life rarely changes because of one dramatic mistake. It changes because we convince ourselves that one more compromise will not matter. Over the next several days we began dividing practical responsibilities with surprising respect. We created separate schedules, discussed financial accounts without raised voices, and organized household paperwork that neither of us had touched in years. Friends noticed we seemed unusually quiet, but we chose not to involve anyone else. This was not a story that needed an audience. It needed honesty. One evening Olivia handed me a small envelope. Inside was the birthday card she had purchased before everything fell apart. The message had been written days earlier in her familiar handwriting. It spoke about gratitude, partnership, and growing old together. She smiled sadly as I finished reading it. I bought that before I made another terrible decision, she said. I folded the card carefully and returned it to the envelope. I believe you, I answered. That is what makes it even harder. She looked surprised. You still believe me? About some things, I said honestly. I believe you loved me at one time. I believe you never expected your choices to bring us here. But love without honesty cannot survive, and good intentions cannot repair broken trust by themselves. She quietly accepted those words. There was no anger left between us, only the understanding that consequences continue long after excuses disappear. A few days later she packed several boxes and arranged to stay temporarily with her sister while we completed the legal process. Before leaving, she paused at the front door and looked back at the house we had built together over the years. I hope one day you remember more than my worst mistake, she said softly. I thought about that for a long moment before answering. I probably will. But I also have to remember it clearly enough that I never ignore the truth when it quietly asks to be seen again. She nodded once, walked to her car, and drove away without looking back, leaving behind a house that suddenly felt emptier but, for the first time in a very long while, completely honest. The weeks that followed were quieter than I ever imagined. There were no dramatic courtroom moments, no shouting matches, and no attempts to embarrass each other. Instead, life moved forward one ordinary day at a time, proving that some of the biggest changes happen so gradually that you only recognize them after they have already become your new reality. I focused on work, spent more evenings with my parents, and started taking long walks after dinner instead of sitting in a silent house wondering how everything had unraveled. The routine did not erase the pain, but it gave my mind somewhere healthy to rest while my heart slowly caught up. Olivia stayed with her sister across town, and aside from conversations about paperwork or household responsibilities, we rarely communicated. Every message was respectful, brief, and practical. The anger that many people expected never arrived because anger requires energy, and I had decided to invest mine somewhere else. One afternoon, nearly 6 weeks after we separated, Olivia asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss the final documents. I agreed because there was nothing left to avoid. She looked different when she walked into the cafe. Not because of her clothes or hairstyle, but because the confidence she had once carried so effortlessly had been replaced by quiet humility. After we finished reviewing the documents, she hesitated before speaking again. There is something you should know, she said. I waited without interrupting. The man I was meeting is no longer part of my life. Her voice carried no bitterness, only disappointment in herself. When everything became public between us, he told me he was not looking for a serious relationship. He left the company a few days later. I listened calmly, neither satisfied nor surprised. I am sorry, I said honestly. She looked confused by my response. You are? I nodded. Not because I wanted things to work out between the two of you. I am sorry because sometimes people risk something real for something that was never real to begin with. She looked down at her coffee and quietly admitted. I kept believing I could control every outcome. I thought I could fix everything before anyone got hurt. I gently shook my head. The hardest lessons in life usually begin the moment we realize we were never in control at all. She thanked me for treating her with more kindness than she felt she deserved. Before leaving, she said something that stayed with me for a long time. You know what I miss the most? It is not the house or the routines. It is the version of myself that existed before I started hiding things from the person who trusted me the most. I understood exactly what she meant because betrayal changes both people. One loses trust. The other loses the ability to look back without regret. A month later, the legal process was completed with little difficulty. Friends occasionally asked what had happened, and I simply told them that sometimes two good people make choices that lead them in different directions. I refused to turn the end of my marriage into gossip because healing never grows from humiliation. As I drove home after signing the final papers, I passed the hotel where everything had finally come into the open. The building looked exactly the same as it always had. Cars entered the garage. Guests carried luggage through the front entrance. Business meetings continued behind polished glass doors. Nothing about the place had changed. The only thing that had changed was me. I no longer saw a hotel. I saw the moment I stopped ignoring what I already knew, and I realized that accepting the truth had cost me my marriage, but refusing to accept it would have cost me myself. 1 year later my birthday arrived again, but this time the morning felt completely different. There were no anxious glances at my phone, no carefully managed expectations, and no quiet hope that someone else would choose me over another obligation. I woke up early, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened every curtain in the house, and watched the Texas sunrise paint the backyard with soft, golden light. For the first time in a long time, peace did not feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. My parents invited me to dinner that evening, and a few close friends planned a small gathering afterward. There were no expensive reservations, no elaborate surprises, and no pressure for the day to become perfect. It was simply honest, and I had learned that honest moments are often the ones we remember the longest. Before leaving for work, I opened a small drawer in my desk where I had placed the birthday card Olivia had once given me. I had kept it not because I wanted to relive the past, but because it reminded me of an important lesson. A relationship is not defined only by the happiest words people write to each other. It is ultimately defined by whether everyday actions continue to match those words. I read the card one final time, smiled with quiet gratitude for everything it had taught me, and placed it into a memory box before closing the lid. Some memories belong in our lives. Others belong only in our growth. A few weeks earlier I had unexpectedly crossed paths with Olivia at a community charity event. We recognized each other immediately, exchanged polite smiles, and spent a few minutes talking about work and family. She looked healthier than the last time I had seen her, calmer somehow. Before we walked away, she thanked me again for treating her with dignity during the hardest season of our lives. I wished her well, and this time those words came without hesitation. Forgiveness had not changed the past, but it had released the future from carrying its weight forever. As I drove home from the event, I realized I no longer measured my life by what I had lost. I measured it by what I had regained. I trusted my own judgment again. I laughed more easily. I accepted invitations instead of making excuses to stay home. Most importantly, I stopped believing that someone else's choices determined my worth. That birthday evening my mother placed a small homemade cake on the table, and everyone sang far too loudly while laughing through the entire song. The candles flickered in front of me just as they had the year before, but everything inside me had changed. When they asked what I wished for before blowing them out, I quietly answered, "I already received it." They looked puzzled until I smiled and added, "The courage to accept the truth, even when it changed my life." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stepped onto the back porch and looked up at the stars. The silence around me felt familiar, but it no longer carried sadness. It carried gratitude. Looking back, I realized the message I had sent on my previous birthday had never been about exposing someone else. It had been about refusing to hide from reality any longer. Sometimes life does not reward us by giving us the ending we expected. Sometimes it rewards us by removing the illusion that kept us from finding a better beginning. If there is one lesson my journey will always remind me of, it is this. Trust is one of the greatest gifts we can offer another person, but self-respect is the promise we must always keep to ourselves. The day I finally chose truth over comfort was the day I stopped losing my marriage and started finding myself again.